I think this is a contribution which we sometimes seem to forget in Indian diplomacy. It was the skill with which, under Mr. Vajpayee's leadership, we handled the world pressure. Testing to start with, world pressure to follow, and a nuclear doctrine which I think was sensible and right, of no first use, though that's a matter of some controversy. I still believe that that decision was right and should not be changed. Therefore, when Clinton left, we had George Bush. And I want to narrate an interesting, I hope you don't mind my narrating interesting stories here. My son-in-law was still recently the editor of the Economic Times, and in 1997 he was engaged to my daughter. So he was on best behavior with me. And now he's damad. He was damad to be at that point in time. He had been invited to the United States and met a number of politicians there. And I asked him, who was the politician who impressed you most? He says, there was this governor of Texas. We were a group of 10 journalists from across the world. And when we met this man, the other 9 were leaving, and he said, you please stay on. And he told my son-in-law, Rohit Saran, that, I can't understand this. You're a democracy of 1 billion people. We are the most powerful democracy in the world. Why don't we have better relations? And I think, since I'm going back to what I had said earlier, the most important problem we faced worldwide was India was subject to technology and nuclear sanctions not just by the United States, but by 45 advanced countries. And the only way to end those sanctions and to open the door was to get the United States to end the sanctions. I think everybody goes wrong about the India-US nuclear agreement. It was not an India-US nuclear agreement. It was an agreement to commence the end of sanctions and India's isolation in the world. And therefore, yes, there were portions of it which we may not have liked, but one had to look at the larger perspective. Today, you don't have to go to the Americans. You can have your nuclear law and get your uranium from Kazakhstan and Namibia and from Australia or wherever you want, and now Canada. And really our nuclear program was suffering. And I'm just saying something, please keep it to yourself. We were running out of uranium. There are too many environmental NGOs and civil society organizations here which want to oppose anything which happens. And even uranium exploration in Arunachal Pradesh and Andhra Pradesh could not be carried out. And believe me, our nuclear plants were working at 50% of capacity. Bush had this gut feeling. And a good friend of mine has been Robert Blackwell, who used to be his ambassador here. And Blackwell told me that during the election campaign, he said, Bob, I'm sending you to set things right with India. The sad part of it is, and I'm sorry to say this here, I have 2 members of parliament. We could welcome Clinton in our parliament, yet due to domestic political opposition, which I felt was stupid, we could not welcome Bush, who was the real friend of India, and not Clinton, in the Indian parliament. Perhaps historically we need to consider this. Yes, we disagreed with what Bush did in Iraq, we disagreed with what he did somewhere else. But as far as we are concerned, we are Indians, we have to look at what he did for India. How's it? I mean, if tomorrow Bush had treated India badly, the Iraqis and the Arabs would not be shedding tears. And I think this factor in India-US relations has to be borne in mind. There is, and I'll come to the election immediately. Then he was succeeded after 2 terms by Obama. Frankly, Obama had a we had our serious doubts about what Obama would do. He opposed the nuclear deal. He was opposed to the end of nuclear sanctions against India as a senator. His only link from his college days in the 1980s was Pakistan. His roommate and best friend in Chicago was a Pakistani. And when he was elected, we had really to be serious concerns. Worse still, just after he was elected, he was persuaded by a duo of an American academic by the name of Barnett Rubin and by Ahmed Rashid, the Pakistani journalist, who remained on his advisory council for quite some time, that for improving relations and securing Pakistani cooperation in Afghanistan, the US must play a direct role as a mediator in the Kashmir issue. In his first few months, and I know this because I was a part of a group which told off the new incoming administration, they actually wanted to appoint a special envoy of the stature of Bill Clinton to act as a mediator between India and Pakistan to resolve Kashmir. They were told in very blunt terms that that would be totally unacceptable. The second thing which upset us in Obama's early days was his decision when he went to China to almost give China the role of an overlord in South Asia. That was the extent to which it again goes back to the Clinton days. That, China is the emerging power and so on. It was almost a reversal of Bush. But reality prevailed. China was and is becoming increasingly aggressive and assertive. Today, it is laying claim to the whole of the South China Sea. It has serious territorial differences with South Korea on its maritime boundaries, with South Korea, with Japan, with Vietnam, with Philippines, with Brunei and Malaysia. So it has, the claims that China makes on its territorial waters has no bearing or relevance in international law. It's just a question of jiski lathi uski bhais. And they have put enough pressure, military pressure on Philippines in securing one of those islands. They are setting up military bases very close to Vietnam. And the territorial dispute with Japan has picked up very serious dimensions. It is in these circumstances that Hillary Clinton announced, and I must draw a distinction between Hillary Clinton and her husband. Hillary Clinton, in her days in the White House, was genuinely friendly to India. She was greatly impressed by the way women's issues were being handled in India. She had come here as the First Lady. And I think, and this is very important, I think one of the important factors of the first Obama administration is Hillary Clinton's approach to India. She was very positive. And then they arrived at a council agreement which she called a rebalancing of American foreign policy with focus on the Indo-Pacific. This was a new term coined by Hillary Clinton. By Indo-Pacific, she meant, rather than looking at this whole region from the Atlantic and from the Middle East, start looking at American interests from the Pacific Ocean onto the Indian Ocean. And this was a major change. The Americans have been more than forthcoming in the extent of military exercises and cooperation they are willing to have with us. For reasons which I'm not very clear, some ideological, the other personal, the other the domestic politics and, vote banks, we have not been as forthcoming as we could be. I'm certain if Mr. Vajpayee was around, the response would have been somewhat different. Nobody is suggesting that we become an American ally or endorse them. But certainly opportunities do not like this do not come often in history. And that's an opportunity which we have not seized to the full extent that we could. Yes, defense cooperation has gone up, but how much, whether it could have been handled better, is an open issue. But one thing is very clear. It's not the rise of China. China has a real problem. You're talking of corruption in India. But at least here you have a democratic system and people create enough hangama to, place limits,
it gets exposed.
Get it exposed in the press. But in China, just bear in mind, according to revelations, Prime Minister Wen Jiabao and his family have assets worth $2.5 billion. Xi Jinping, the successor president, and his family have assets worth $500 million. Perhaps we should send Arun Kejriwal to China. The fact of the matter is that in China, you have a government losing legitimacy in the eyes of its people. And therefore, when you lose legitimacy, what do? They are having, in fairness to them, their economy is doing splendidly. Even in difficult times, they grow at 7 and 8% an annum. And let us be very, very clear, economically, they have far outstripped and overtaken us.